the surviving elites of the cosmic war and their hidden agenda. I went, whoa, what's that all about? Tell me about this.
There was actually an interplanetary war. I think there's been a long-term agenda since ancient times to get humanity back to a very sophisticated state of civilization so that essentially they can reach out themselves to the stars. I think this is their goal. There were so many reports and legends of very strange creatures, even resembling dinosaurs, coming out of Africa in particular, that there had to have been some basis in fact behind them. Is that we are looking at a bit of a cover-up. I think that there is such a vested interest in maintaining the status quo and maintaining the standard models of human evolution and the progress and history of civilization. If you go to Mesoamerica, for example, and examine the legends of the Aztecs or the Mayans or even the Hopi in North America, they all record a conflict, an actual war with the giants. This war against the giants was fought, in their own words, because of the sexual practices of the giants. That reminds you, of course, and I noticed your website that you put up the Greek version of the war against the giants, the Gigantomachy. So, yeah, we have to explain something else here, and that is, why is it that we have the legends of this war against the giants with the Greeks, and then half a world and an ocean away, we find the same legends among completely different cultures with Aztecs and Mayans? So I have to conclude that there's some sort of basis in fact behind all of these things long, long ago in prehistory.
And and you look at the Bible, you look at Genesis, and
right.
It talks about the giants.
In the Greek version of this war, you have, of course, Saturn, or Kronos, being the principal god at the beginning of the Greek pantheonic history. And then, of course, Kronos sires a race of giants, and there's a large war. And that war had to have been fought, in my opinion, on an interplanetary basis millennia, if not millions of years ago. So what we're looking at with these legends, I think, all over the world is kind of a vague retelling of something that is so ancient that it kind of got garbled in the transmission. But yeah, I agree. I think you have to look at all these texts, including the Bible, talking about a set of tablets, cuneiform tablets called the Karsag tablets, that if you interpret them from a certain point of view, certainly seem to suggest that there is some genetic engineering that took place. And these texts, just to kind of give the details, these texts indicate that there were kind of prototypical proto-human mothers that were selected, and then a member of the Anunnaki, or whatever you wish to call that group of people, that donated the male component, and that essentially that modern humanity is a genetically engineered and created creature. And furthermore, if you look at these texts, they suggest something very, very disturbing. The first thing that these texts, all from the Mayans to the Mesopotamians, state is that mankind was created as a kind of a slave to serve the gods, all right? And American patent law, if you patent a gene, under patent law, the invention has to be duplicatable by the hand of man. Number two, it cannot arise in nature, and it must have had the hand of man in the invention so that it can be patentable. Well, if you apply these concepts to the ancient texts, you find that all the texts would be able to be adjudicated under American patent law and a patent awarded for basically the creation of mankind. So again, we come down to the fact that the implication legally is that we are property. All of this is arguing that you're looking at the activity of at least one elite, if not more, that has been in more or less continual existence since ancient times. Many of the ancient systems of belief were created simply to mask the activity of this elite, to disguise it, as it were, behind religion, behind mystery schools, behind temples and priesthoods.
Gods of ancient times were simply visitors, or, primarily visitors.
I incline to that view, George, and here's why. If you look at these ancient texts, for the most part, they are describing people. They are describing conscious beings with emotions, with feelings, with agendas, and you know, like all intelligent beings, they fight and argue amongst themselves, and so on and so forth. That said, I do think that you have to hold open the possibility as well that many of these ancient legends are telling the truth when they say that these beings are, to some degree, spiritual beings as well. They come from, if you will, other dimensions. They might be angels, they might be demons, and so on and so forth. So I think, to kind of sum it up, that you're really looking at three classes of things. You're looking at genetic cousins, in other words, human-like beings with whom we share some genetic compatibility that makes all this engineering possible. And then secondly, I think you're looking at deeper possible entities, that you're looking at gods in the proper sense. You're looking at angels or what have you, because some of these beings can't be classified, if you examine the text carefully, as corporeal beings like we are. So I think you have to hold open all possibilities. We are looking at descriptions of technologies that are in many cases being used to manipulate the creation of a religious perception of these things. In other words, technologies are being used to create religions. So, you know, that's one possibility. I think you have to look at everything from that region of the world that's describing things that could be technological. I think you have to hold open the possibility that that's exactly what they were. So, again, you have in these Vedic texts just these fantastic descriptions, George, of technological devices, including descriptions that are accurate to a T of the consequences of the explosion of nuclear weapons. You have descriptions of radioactive fallout. You have descriptions of pottery that shatters and breaks if you touch it. And, of course, that's a signature of extremely high gamma ray exposure. We are looking at clear evidences of a technology. We are looking at clear evidences of a very high civilization in ancient times. There's no denying this. You can say what you will about the texts, but when you're confronting the texts with hard evidence of the existence of a technology, this is what makes the reading of these texts as technological descriptions possible. That's why I choose to read them that way.
Is it possible that mankind, like Cremo has said, that we're hundreds of millions of years old, not hundreds of thousands of years old, and that we possess technology, something happened to us, a catastrophe, what have you, and it was gone, obliterated?
There are artifacts of intelligent beings that were here long before any recorded history begins. You know, in some cases we're dealing with artifacts that are millions of years old. So this is long before mankind himself in his modern form is even on the scene. Geneticists think that modern Homo sapiens sapiens was around for, 150 to 200,000 years ago, somewhere in that range. So if we're looking at artifacts that are millions of years ago, we're looking at two things, exactly as you say. We're looking at a sophisticated culture, we're looking at a sophisticated technology. Is that in the Aztec doctrine, for example, you have the idea of 5 different ages, or what they call 5 suns, all right? And one of the peculiar things that they connect that doctrine to, just as do the Mayans, is that in each age there is a different humanity. What they're talking about are continued manipulations of the human species by somebody. You're dealing with a very sophisticated ability to do genetic engineering that we are just now beginning to be able to do. In other words, we are now, George, engineering chimerical creatures, creations that are half human, half animal, and so on and so forth. I think that we've been looking at a kind of a covert war that's been taking place not only here on Earth, but up above in outer space. The technology, George, that we're reaching is so reminiscent of the civilization and culture that was described in these ancient texts, and I think that these elites have to be thinking that they may be in contact with some of these genetic cousins, and we'd better get ready. But if these stories, George, are true, that we are engineered into existence by a group of people with an agenda, then this means we're property. So if they're coming back, you know, the implication is they might be coming back to claim their property.
Sure.
And the problem here, George, is now humanity, as I've indicated, has the technology to fight back. So, you know, it's a pretty nasty scenario that emerges from all of this, and that probably was the most unsettling thing that I found. This is a kind of a civil war. In other words, it's a war taking place between various branches of the pantheon of the gods. And the ultimate motivation for the war, if you read the Vedic text, if you read the Mesopotamian text, is somebody wants to control an extraordinarily powerful technology or to prohibit others from gaining and applying that technology. So we're looking, even in that sense, George, we're looking at kind of a metaphor of today's society as various world powers are trying to prevent other countries from gaining access to nuclear technology and so on and so forth. The motivations for this war were very, very modern. And that's what makes me think that these ancient texts are describing something that actually happened. So these giants enter into the picture, I think, as part of a bigger picture. They are players, they are soldiers in the combat that is involved for the control of this technology. And I'll be very blunt. I think, George, that some of this technology had to have been genetic in nature. In other words, someone wanted to control the processes and issues of life itself. And that's what had to be denied, and that's what had to be fought for. Somebody survived that war. You had a group of people that were an elite that decided, number one, they had to preserve the knowledge that had made their civilization possible, number one. And then number two, they had to jumpstart civilization. One of their first activities was to create units of measure that could be reproducible anywhere in the world to allow a system of common weights and measures in order to conduct trade.
You know, there still seems to be, and as you have written in many of your books, Joseph, a Nazi influence on many things still on this country.
Yes.
It seems to be everywhere, isn't it?
Well, it is, George, and, you know, the whole subject of eugenics that arose in the 1920s and 1930s in this country, in England, and certainly in Germany, I think there is a component, a hidden component of the Genome Project. There's a hidden agenda to it.
Hi, everyone. I was wondering if you have any information on whether people, like elite people that are in like the Bilderberg group, or like the Queen of England, if they're actually, are these people actually Nazis, some of them, or cult members?
I talk about the Bilderbergers, the Nazis, and the elites that were involved in the early Bilderberg days. And the Nazis just didn't cease existing. They survived the war, and they survived the war in an organized and well-financed fashion to coordinate activities between them and the Anglo-American corporate elite on the other that had the banks for the Nazi loot. So, yeah, it's a big story.
I have a theory that I've come up with over the years. For years I've asked about where the different races came from, what the origin of the races was, and I have no satisfactory answer to date. However, with Sitchin's work in the 12th Planet, where he talks about the colonization of the Earth by the Anunnaki, and them wrestling, so to speak, one another's workers and taking them around to different places, is it possible that the Anunnaki colored their people in order to brand them, so to speak, in order to keep one another from stealing their workers?
The closest thing that comes to that are some of the statements in Aztec and Mayan literature where there were previous races of humanity. But you have to understand that when those cultures used the term race, they meant something very much like we would use the term species. So it's not necessarily even a racial thing with those cultures. So I really don't even get into that question at all.
All right, Joseph Farrell.